English translation, 680th Contact, Part 1, Monday the 7th of May 2017, 13:07 hours.
Well, I am delighted you are coming today, Ptaah, dear friend. Greetings and welcome.
I also greet you in my turn and also thank you for your welcome.
With your permission, I have one thing I want to say at the very beginning of our conversation.
Of course, because there is nothing against it.
Good. Then I would like to get to the point. On the 27th of April 2017, I had a visit from Michelle Delafave from New York, and she was accompanied by her friend, Susie Messerly, whereby it was she who contacted Michael Horn, learned our email address from him and made contact with Christian Freiner, following which the visit took place. Michelle is the American doppelganger of Asket, about which there has been much talk in the contact reports. Christian has written the following short statement about this visit. Also added 3 photos and also the various contact conversations between you and I, which we had regarding the fake Asket Nera photos. Michelle, that is to say the doppelganger of Asket, is still active as a singer and delights with her singing mainly war veterans, as she also sang about several CDs, which are still on sale. It was very interesting conversations with Michelle and one of her friends, who captured the whole conversation on film. What Christian has written and compiled is this.
Visit by the Asket Doppelganger at SSSC report by Christian Freiner, Switzerland.
On the 27th of April, 2017, Michelle Delafave from New York visited the Simyase Silver Star Center and Billy for the first time. The visit came about after her accompanying friend, Susie Messerly, contacted Michael Horn. Michelle is the Asket double mentioned in the contact reports. She is still active as a singer and delights mainly war veterans with her singing. She has sung on several CDs which are still available. Due to the cool winter-spring weather, the meeting with Billy took place in the kitchen, warmed by the wood fire. In a longer conversation, Michelle talked about her activities and her quest for spiritual conscious insights. She was very much looking forward to meeting Billy because she appreciates his work and wants to support it. She said that for many years she had not known that a picture of her and her then colleague Susie alum, taken over 40 years ago as part of her membership of the Dingling Sisters on the famous Dean Martin show, had been misused. When she was asked by Derek Bartholomew for the Independent Investigations Group a few years ago to confirm that the pictures formerly referred to by the FIGU as Asket Nera photos actually showed her and her friend Susie, she was merely confirming the similarity. She did not want to be instrumentalized. At the end of the pleasant and enjoyable conversation, Michelle received the 9 available English books as a gift from Billy, and she expressed her intention to maintain contact with us. Her friend Susie filmed the conversation and received permission to publish the material. Interested persons will thus have the opportunity to get an impression of the conversation for themselves.
So, this is what Christian wrote briefly about the visit of Michelle Delafave and her friend Susie Messerly. I do not have to say anything special about Asket Nera photos and their story, because you know what was said about it when all the unpleasant things happened. This was when it was discovered that I had illegally copied my slides, photos and films and sold them all over the world, when the Rhine Valley photographer Schmid had forged the Asket Nera photos. And the Black Men group was also involved in order to destroy my work and make me seem outrageously as an alleged fraud in the whole world. But now I want to insert the following 3 pictures in our conversation, which I have here, as you can see, after which I will list the old factual conversation excerpts from the contact reports that Christian picked out of the old contact conversations, in order to clarify the whole thing once again, what was said back then, when all the intrigues, lies, and unpleasantness had been revealed.
From left to right, Billy, Christian Freiner, Michelle Delafave, U.S. American doppelganger of Asket. Far right, Michelle Delafeve's friend, Susie Massoli, who has nothing to do with Michelle's colleague Susie Lund, the US-American doppelganger of Nera. Michelle Delafave, US-American doppelganger of Ascot, and Billy on the 27th of April 2017.
Pleiadian Ptaah and Contact Reports, Volume 1, page 283.
But now a special question for you, Ascot. For a long time, I have been trying to get permission from Sim Yase to take a photo of her. Unfortunately, however, I cannot get permission from her. But how would it be if I could put you and Nera on my film? Would you allow that?
If that pleases you, then of course. With Simyase, unfortunately, it is that if you took a picture of her and spread it around the earth, her safety would not be guaranteed. That is why she also prohibited this at the time when certain difficulties arose in your group. I am only afraid that if you take pictures of Nera and me already, they will not be good.
But why not?
I know from my stay on Earth that pictures are always very bad if we have made them in our ships or in their environment. Most of the time they were very blurry or just out of focus. This has to do with certain energy radiations that are harmless to life forms, which distort everything and often also affect and change the colors of color films.
Have you really gotten into filming? And what is it like with the machine that Sim Yase had me build to take better pictures?
In my own interest, I took up photography and thus also recognized the difficulties regarding the fluctuating energy radiation, which can even destroy the films in certain cases. But which apparatus are you talking about?
Sim Yase had me make one of those things so that I could take better pictures.
Ascot turns to Sim Yase and talks to her briefly, and now she explains the following to me.
Simyase explained the nature of the device to me, which unfortunately you could not understand. But unfortunately, I have to explain to you that the pictures cannot be very good with this device either. But we will try to work out an effective device together to give you the opportunity for better photo material later. But if you still want to take some pictures of us, you can do so now. If you are not using it and keep it for yourself, you may take a group picture of us, together with Simyase.
Thank you, Ascot. I will, of course, keep it for myself if it turns out well.
Then take the pictures now. At a later time, you will also be able to take different pictures of Simyase when she is no longer endangered on Earth. But this may take several years or even decades. For my part, recognition is really not important, because for the time being I will not come to Earth anymore. It is also the same for Nera. On the other hand, there are life forms in the whole universe that look deceptively similar to each other, so that someone can be mistaken for someone else. You call this doppelganger.
I see. Now I'm taking the photos.
Ascot, Nera, and Sim Yase stand next to each other and I take several pictures. Unlike Sim Yase, Ascot and Nera are not wearing spacesuits but normal clothes, which are actually quite different from those I know from earthly women's fashion. But they are very well dressed with it. Later it turned out unfortunately that the group picture was completely unrecognizable. Pleiadian Ptaah and Contact Reports, Volume 2, page 40.
It was a big exception that you were allowed to take photos of Ascot and Nera. Although we have found Earth humans in America who look deceptively like them and who, interestingly enough, also work together in community.
Mannequin, that is a pity. But the women, the doppelgangers of Ascot and Nera, where are they?
In the land of America. That is what I said.
Can you give me their addresses and any other details about them?
I do not want to for certain reasons.
You are always so mysterious.
In certain respects, it must be.
Pleiadian Pleer and Contact Reports, Volume 8, page 14.
Well then, once again I am preoccupied with something that I do not quite understand. It is actually connected with intrigues and slander, which I do not mind in and of itself, but which do raise some questions. You know, the schemers and slanderers Korf as well as LB, both of them have now made a new interview with my dear ex-girlfriend, my ex-wife, which they now want to distribute around the world in the month of July, apparently together with an explanation or revelation regarding the two photos of Asket and Nera, which I am supposed to have taken from a TV set, and which are not supposed to show Asket and Nera, but the two American doubles, who you are supposed to have seen in the 39th contact conversation. You said that there were two young women living and working together in America in the same job who were exact copies of Asket and Nera.
The two pictures also show the two doppelgangers in America.
How am I to understand that? I myself photographed Asket and Nera.
That is true, but you never received the original pictures taken from your film.
I do not understand.
You really cannot remember?
Remember what?
On the 3rd of February, 1985, when Quetzal and I visited you and explained to you some of the connections that are related to the photos mentioned above.
No, I have no memory of that. What happened then?
We informed you that you have received false images that show not Asket and not Nera.
Now I do not understand anything.
I understand. You have really forgotten everything that was surely due to your life-threatening condition at that time, which was also connected with a partial amnesia, so that you are not able to remember many things.
But now please do not make it intriguing.
In and of itself, we did not want to deal with these issues publicly at that time.
I think it is necessary, though, if I have false Asket Nera images, which have also been sold under this name until now. If that is indeed the case, then I will be harassed all the more viciously.
It is not your fault, because it has to be assigned to your photographer, who was forced to do something wrong by a group of the black men and cheated you.
This rabble is known to me. One of them also once chased my daughter Gilgamesha when she was on her way home from school. They ran after her with a knife in her hand. When she was not caught, the cowardly guys fled in a big black limousine.
The story is known to me. But now listen. Apparently, it is necessary to tell you everything again, and this time it is also necessary that it becomes public, if you want to record the conversation later.
Certainly.
So, since you have never been intimidated by any kind of infamous and dangerous and even life-threatening machinations of the black men since the beginning of your contacts with us, and even laughed at attempted assassinations, and were always armed with the appropriate permission of the authorities, I must say the black men found it necessary to make you outrageous and unbelievable all over the world. Since they could not get at you themselves, they forced quite massive people working with you, such as photographer Schmid, to discredit you in the long run. So Schmid was forced to make fakes of your pictures made with our permission, that is to say, to forge them from scratch or to falsify your made pictures. Several times your own films, which you gave to photographer Schmid for developing and making pictures during the first period of your contacts, were replaced by him with completely new and fake films, so that you received many fake negatives and photos from the very beginning, or also fake pictures. This also happened with the film on which you captured Asket and Nera, which you only got back months later, and which was in fact a product of the black men who had located and photographed Asket's and Nera's doubles in America, after which the pictures were edited by Schmid and handed over to you. Of course, you believed that these were the originals, but they were really fakes, and your real photos were deceptively fake. That is why you were not aware of the fraud, which is equally true for us. We only became aware of this deception in the autumn of 1984, when we brought the pictures from you to Ascot, because she wanted them. She noticed the deception immediately, of course, so we went into it and found out that the black men were behind the whole thing and that the photographer was their force tool. Note Ptaah from 3.3. 2005. The pictures of the doppelgangers are so deceptively real that Ptaah was also misled and deceived by them. Only Ascot noticed the deception 9 years later. Schmid made the fake pictures on their behalf and placed them in your hands as originals, so that you always thought that they were your own pictures, also regarding the pictures of Ascot and Nera. With regard to these images in particular, we found out that Schmid immediately handed over the film he had developed to the black men, respectively to the black men, as they are called in your ufological circles, who within a few days had found the Ascot and Nera doubles in America and had been able to take several photographs, so that the two images you knew were created and handed over to you. The Giza intelligences also played a certain role in the whole thing, as well as on other occasions, as you are very well aware. But we were not able to clarify the exact connections. What is clear, however, is that they influenced a considerable number of Earth humans impulsively and negatively in order to harm, defame, or even kill you, as was tried several times, unsuccessfully, unfortunately. And finally, everything was done to make you and your mission impossible, especially by accusations of fraud regarding photo forgeries. And both the black men are still working against you and your mission, which is to be destroyed, as well as the decades of continuous impulse telepathic negative machinations. And affected by these impulses of the Giza intelligences might be all those who work full of intrigues, slander, and other negative machinations against you and the mission, without having any knowledge of the impulses.
Not very pleasant. But how long will these Giza impulses continue to be effective on Earth?
It may take another 200 or 300 years.
What should I do with the photographs? Under these circumstances, I cannot use them anymore, and of course I cannot sell them either. Now I really feel like a fraud because I declared them as Ascot Nera pictures.
You are not to blame for this whole thing. But you could simply call the pictures American doppelgangers Ascot and Nera and continue to use them in this form.
The one with Ascot's and Nera's pictures? That was 1975 or so. So it was a very long time ago, and the effects are only coming today. That's what I call calculation over time. Enormous, and in fact everything demands respect from me. But why did we not put that in a contact report? That would have cleared things up earlier.
Unfortunately, it was not possible from your side at that time. After Quetzal's last contact with you on the 31st of October 1984, and after you finished your book O.M., your health was so bad and you were several years closer to death than to life that you were not able to write down contact conversations anymore. Only on the 17th of November 1989, your health and strength were such that you were able to write down our conversations again.
But that I have forgotten all about it.
You know yourself how many things and facts you had to learn anew, and that you also could not learn many things anymore. Your memory is organically damaged, so it is also not active in the way it used to be. Just think about your powers of consciousness and your abilities of consciousness, with which you have achieved many a tremendous achievement.
Unfortunately, it is like that. I know. Besides that, you are also often asked too much, so that you cannot always concentrate enough on the things that are most necessary. But may I ask where this photographer Schmid actually came from? Because he never gave me his address. He always picked up my films and negatives, etc. from me, and also brought them back to me himself. When I once asked about it, he explained that he could not give his address, because his wife was not allowed to know that he came and went with me. She was set against me and would be furious when she heard my name. He just always said that he came from the Rhine Valley.
The man died years ago. So there is no need to ask. All I am saying is that it was a lie that he lived in the Rhine Valley. But the reason that he did not give you an address might have been that he was under the constraints of the black men who really threatened him severely.
He always seemed a little scared. I remember that very well.
With good reason if you think about the black men.
Actually, I feel sorry for the schemers and slanderers, because if they are blinded by the impulsive telepathic machinations of the Giza intelligences, there is little hope for them to ever come to reason and truth in this life, so that they will go more and more astray. By the way, you have shipped these Giza twerps to other places. Is it really true that from there they cannot get back to Earth or make contact with other intelligences to influence them and cause new harm?
Earth humans can be sure that they will never again be bothered by these degenerates. Other intelligences are also safe from them.
Perhaps another question comes to my mind regarding the Asket Nera, respectively the doppelganger pictures. But first I have another question that I want to ask you. But now one question has finally occurred to me which relates to the black men and their machinations with the doppelgangers and the photographer. How could the black men find the two Americans so easily and quickly and also photograph them in the desired form?
The black men, as they are called because of their always black clothing, have always had undreamt of possibilities for normal human beings, respectively citizens, which made it easy for them to find the two young artists. In fact, nothing is hidden from these extremely unscrupulous men when they get involved in something. The pictures made in relation to the doppelgangers we actually told you about on the 3rd of February 1985 were, however, not made directly with the two young women, but were copied from a screening film that the black men got hold of. I think that this type of film used is called a review film. In any case, individual frames were copied out of it, and the men, together with photographer Schmid, selected those that most resembled your pictures of Asket and Nera, which is why you could also be deceived like this. So the purpose of the whole thing was to create certain situational pictures that were deceptively similar to the pictures you made of Asket and Nera. The point was that you would naturally distribute these fake, or rather doppelganger pictures and sell them to interested parties, as real pictures of Asket and Nera. But exactly this should one day put you in the position of a cheat, because it was calculated that sooner or later someone hostile to you would investigate these pictures and thus get to the bottom of it, with the inevitable consequence that the aforementioned screening film, respectively review film, would be found, and the false Asket Nera pictures in it would be recognized as those of the doppelgangers. This should then supposed to be taken as evidence to expose you as an alleged swindler, thus making yourself and your story impossible and destroying your mission. So already back in 1975, everything was thoroughly pre-programmed by the black men, that the corresponding picture sequences had to be found in the foreseeable future with their help, which has probably happened in the meantime and will be exploited by your enemies in the not-too-distant future. And these enemies against you and your mission, there is no doubt in our minds, are all purely Earth humans who are under the influence of the Giza impulses which will remain effective for a long time to come.
So also Corfin B?
Without a doubt.
So, you and Quetzal, you explained everything to me on the 3rd of February 1985 in relation to the alleged Asket Nera images, which in reality represent the American doubles you mentioned in a conversation, which, unfortunately, is no longer present in my mind, since I have really forgotten everything. Now the question why you did not explain these facts to me again later in detail. Because if I had taken everything consciously, I would have taken the pictures out of circulation and published a corresponding information in our 3-monthly magazine, Wasser Mannzeit.
All these years we did not know that you had forgotten our explanations regarding these matters, Otherwise, we would have informed you again in due course.
I would like to ask you one more question, which I have just been asked. You said with regard to the black men that the statements made in this regard were a matter of trust, and that this will not change so quickly. Does that mean that you might be able to make open statements on this in the near future? I am sure that a great many human beings would be interested in that.
This possibility is not to be excluded, but open statements from our side could only be made when we know the exact how, where from, and why of these mysterious beings. For the time being, everything concerning this is still closed to us, although we have been trying for decades to unveil the secret.
Pleiadian Player and Contact Reports, Volume 12, page 230.
This is really important to me. Look here, these photos are from the internet. They are the fake photos of Ascot and the alleged American doppelganger. However, I cannot see the very great similarity of what has been talked about all these years. Only a certain similarity. By doppelganger, I imagine that two human beings are so strikingly similar that they are not, or hardly distinguishable from each other. But here, as these pictures that Piero took out of the internet and put into my computer prove, there is only a certain similarity. So there is not a doppelganger, or do you see it differently? What do you say, which picture represents Ascot and which is the so-called doppelganger? It is also not to be understood that you never told me anything about it.
I see these juxtaposed pictures for the first time, because I never cared about how the doppelganger should look. It was probably a mistake I made carelessly. What I told you about the forgery was only based on the fact that I told you the information that was spread about it, and that your photo was manipulated, like the one that showed Ascot and Nera. What I had looked at myself were only the falsified pictures with our flying apparatus. It was really careless of me not to deal with the Ascot photo and with the alleged doppelganger. That the photo is also listed on the internet, I did not know that any more than you did, because we have long since finished these unpleasant things with the photo forgeries. So we did not bother about it anymore, which was obviously a mistake, but on the other hand would probably also have been of no use, because the slanderous machinations of the opponents certainly cannot be stopped and cannot be terminated. Too much envy and hatred of the adversaries is in their thoughts and aspirations against you. It is very difficult for all of them to accept that you are not impressed by their evil and slanderous machinations and intrigues, and that you are unswervingly carrying on your mission. But to your question, in this photo here, Ascot is clearly visible on the left side, while the persons on the right side must be the alleged doppelganger, who in fact only bears a certain resemblance to Ascot, but not a real doppelganger. The comparison with her to Ascot is ridiculous. The facial expression of Ascot does not match that of the similarity person, nor does the shape and fullness of the face. The mouth, chin, and eye areas are also recognizably different. Ascot also has a long and narrow neck, while the person resembling her clearly indicates a short and firm, respectively thick neck. The hair color is also not the same, because the person resembling the likeness obviously has hair which is obviously dyed white blonde, while Ascot has darker hair, which however has obviously been changed by photographic manipulation and should probably be adapted to the person resembling the likeness. So from this alone, it is clearly recognizable that the two pictures represent two different female persons. It was probably careless of me not to have looked at the comparison pictures earlier in order to express my opinion about the fact that there is no real doppelganger between Ascot and the similarity person, but only a certain resemblance.
I also only found out this Thursday night when Piero showed me the pictures from the internet. What this picture now shows tells me that the photo in Guido's book is actually not showing Ascot and Nera. So we have to correct this by putting this photo here in Guido's book and an explanation for it. But you should clarify very carefully if the photo in Guido's book is a fake.
This is necessary, in my opinion. I agree with you, but it will take time.
Pleiadian and Contact Reports, Volume 12, page 280.
But now I also want to and can give you an answer to what we decided at the official conversation on Thursday, the 18th of November 2010. Namely, that we will clarify very carefully whether the pictures of Ascot and Nera in Guido's book are real or fake. Even then, I told you that it would take a long time, and unfortunately it actually took some time to clarify everything, because in the past we had to do lengthy research to be able to clarify everything. It is probably not necessary to explicitly list and clarify all our efforts and the related facts, because the only thing that is important is whether the Ascot-Nera pictures in Guido's book correspond to your original pictures and whether they are manipulated, or whether they are pictures that show the American doppelgangers. It is a fact that at that time a malicious group, which you also know by name from various attempts on your life, the man Schmid, the very photographer who had already falsified your pictures in 1975, supplied you with original pictures of the two American doppelgangers who appeared in a review. Schmid was forced by the group, under serious threats, to combine the pictures sent to him with your pictures, to connect them with each other and to falsify them in order to discriminate against you later on and make you untrustworthy worldwide, for which the reasons are well known. In the course of these machinations, it has already been worked towards the fact that several unstable and self-overestimating and self-important persons, who are known to you by name, had to become aware of the American review dancers respectively of the doppelgangers of Ascot and Nera in the 1990s. The period up to that time was calculated in such a way that you and your mission had to be known worldwide in those years, so that a new and comprehensive intrigue and slander should cause a storm of indignation and thus a collapse of the mission. The calculation in this regard was based on slander, perfidiously evoked from the very beginning of your mission, that you had maliciously and fraudulently falsified the pictures of our beam ships as well as the pictures of your great journey. These slanders, which had already arisen at the very beginning, were also based on the machinations of the aforementioned malicious group. For here, too, very unstable and pathologically self-overestimating, high-handed as well as notorious envious people and opponents of the truth were influenced to such an extent that they left nothing out of consideration in order to harm you and the mission with lies, deceit, insults, and slander. And as a result of the threats against the photographer Schmid by the aforementioned group, he himself also became an adversary against you and the mission, and the lies and cooperation of a certain former FIGU member were very convenient for him. It was that same person who also stole from you and tried to cause damage with like-minded people by means of tremendous slander, which, however, was thoroughly unsuccessful because all the righteous human beings remained devoted to the real truth and thus to your mission and contacts with us, Pleiadian, and the longer they were, the more they grew. Schmid, the photographer, therefore, in accordance with the threat and compulsion exercised upon him, combined your original pictures with original pictures of the review dancers respectively of the American doppelgangers and made correspondingly falsifying manipulations of them. From these forgeries he made new slides, which he returned to you as your own originals of the Ascot-Nera slides. But since you are not educated in photographic techniques, etc., you did not notice the malicious deception, but only after the deception of the photographer Schmid, respectively, his forgery became public. So you considered the fake pictures which show Ascot and Nera, but also the two American doppelgangers, as real, and therefore they also found their way into Guido's book.
So then in the photos, 4 different persons were manipulated together to form 2 persons. 2 of each of the women are practically identical to each other in such a way that they cannot be separated from each other.
That is correct, and with that the matter is finally settled.
Which will not silence the enemy. Actually, I find the whole of these manipulations and machinations just as ridiculous as the opponents, who want to make a profit by smear articles. Lies, deceptions, insults, shenanigans, fake photos and films, as well as by slander, etc. regarding me, my photos and the contact reports, as well as my books, writings, materials, and my mission.
It will certainly be the case that the adversaries will continue with their lies and slander, etc., because stupidity, lack of consciousness, foolishness, ignorance, and reprehensibility cannot be cured. And that everything is really ridiculous, and that the adversaries also make themselves ridiculous. This is a fact that is undeniable.
There is no remedy against dim-wittedness. I think that these excerpts made by Christian in connection with Michel Delafeve's visit are necessary to bring the matter of the Ascot Nera photos in connection with Michelle and her former colleague Susan Susie Lund to a close after a long time. The origin of the whole thing, from which a worldwide controversy and an intrigue against me arose, in order to make me out to be a fraud and to call me names, whereby my ex-wife was also diligently involved, is over 40 years ago. As part of this intrigue, I was planted with fake Ascot Nera photographs, which in reality showed Michelle Delafave and her colleague Susan Susie Lund, taken by the Dingeling sisters on the famous Dean Martin show in the USA, which had been misused to make me look like a fraud. They were taken by a photographer named Schmid, together with the help of the so-called black men who often crept around our center and caused various damages, but also threatened our daughter Gilgamesha with a knife. The photographer Schmid, who died some time ago, was an acquaintance of, who was also a hobby photographer and who managed my more than 1,500 slides, photos, and 8 films, kept them in safekeeping, and also sold them worldwide on his own account, but also gave them to photographer Schmid, who forged them on behalf of the black men. The black men prosecuted a small group of people from Switzerland and Germany, but there was also a small group of the who wanted to destroy all my work and defame me as a fraud worldwide. Furthermore, my ex-wife also tried to do this through lies and slander, together with and from Basel, by making a slander film and broadcasting it on television in various countries around the world. But also the black men who were creeping around the center and who were also responsible for several of the 23 assassination attempts that have been carried out on me so far, had nothing to do with the alleged black men, who in the USA as American Secret Service agents of the CIA and the FBI are supposed to have harassed and threatened people because they had observed UFOs. Whether he also had a hand in the forgery of photos, slides, and films, you have clarified that this was not the case. But he stole more than 1,200 of the 1,500 slides from me, copied them and sold them together with prints all over the world, which he had enough time for months because he was unemployed. Also had received back fake slides, negatives, and films from my slide and film material from the photographer Schmid and from him, of which he of course also sold a lot. A small number of slides I got back from photographer Schmid himself, while the rest remained lost. Some copies of negatives, which had already been reproduced from slides and negatives, I was able to buy back from a man in Germany for 10 marks apiece, who in turn had bought them from and who had published the pictures in a magazine, which is why it also came to my attention that my slides, films, and photos had been stolen and sold. He used the money, whose name I am not allowed to mention openly, because he is still alive, to fly to Africa for 3 months with his brother, who had rented a twin-engined Piper PA-23 Aztec plane as a private pilot, Kenya, I think it was. But also my ex-wife sold my slides, photos, and films at outrageous prices and accumulated the money for herself, as I found out little by little. She also teamed up with a Martin Sorge from the canton of Ticino, whose name I am allowed to use because he died years ago, who also forged my slides and photos and even published them in an annual calendar with lying contact reports. Carlo Disch, who also died years ago, belonged in a similar context, as did the liar Dr. F. from the USA, who claimed that he was in contact with your daughter Sim Yase and was even engaged to her, just like the one who lived in Munich claimed that you were in contact with her. The Swiss, whom you also know about and who lives in the Bunderland, also claimed to be in contact with Simyase and forged my photos and films and made photo montages with them. Just as he did in Florida, who pretended to be a Pleiadian living on Earth because he allegedly had to study here. I am not allowed to mention his name, because the guy spreads his lies all over the world and smiled at a woman from eastern Switzerland with whom he lived in Germany. I do not know whether she is still alive or not, so I cannot name her openly. In any case, in Germany he bought himself a title of nobility. And when I publicly called him a swindler because he forged my photos and films and used them for his Pleiades study story to identify himself as a Pleiades student, he sued me in German courts. But they did not deny him what he was doing. They practically legalized it, while I was ordered by the court not to mention his name, now aristocrat anyway, nor his forgery with my photos. Slides and film material in public anymore. Otherwise, I would have to face a fine of at least 500 euros and again a lawsuit and lawyer's fees. For the first time, I also had to pay around 4,000 euros for the whole thing. So I had to pay, although I was in the right, and also I have to keep the name of the cheat secret. Although I am in the right, and the guy still works around with my photos, slides, and films, uses them for his lying and cheating and makes money as a bought aristocrat. But if I wanted to enumerate all the people who wanted to have had contact with Simyase, you and Quetzal, or with other of you Pleiaren, I would have to name about 25 or nearly 30 people who have had fraudulent contact in Switzerland. Germany, France, Spain, the USA, Japan, Australia, China, England, Austria, and Italy, as well as in Holland and Belgium. As you know, the last case in this regard only happened about 2 years ago when from Belgium reported me to the Zurich cantonal police and accused me of kidnapping people because I allegedly kidnapped his alien bride Asket and kept her imprisoned in our center. Of course, because it was their duty, the police came to the center to check the matter. But almost a year before, and also for more than a year afterwards, came to Schmidrudi from Belgium and rioted in front of the Freihof restaurant, constantly calling for Asket and calling me a kidnapper at the top of his voice. This and much more has happened since the 28th of January 1975, since I made our contacts public, but nothing has been made public of most of the unpleasant incidents that have taken place since then, as I have now openly called them, which means that only some members of our core group actually know more than the passive members and the public. That is what I wanted to be clear and frank about.
A short and concise speech, and there is much said with it, but still much not to be said that would have to be said to expose all the malicious attacks, injustice, hatred, falsehood, and slander you have endured against you. But you did not allow yourself to be diverted from your path and mission, despite your partial amnesia, which under all the circumstances would probably have been reason enough for many Earth humans to give up a job like yours if they had been in your place. Because the whole thing would have become an unbearable burden to them.
Maybe, but that is not my way, because I learned from your father, Svath, never to give up, but to always finish a work that was started, and never to see it as a burden. And if I do have to finish my work, it will be when I am carried to the grave. But look here, it was in this context that I wrote this on the computer about a month ago.
Work is never a burden, but a very useful and weighty, meaningful activity. Simyase Silver Star Center, the 30th of April 2017, 1754 HRS, Billy.
You also live according to this aphorism, and my father also said that you have lived and acted according to it since you were a boy.
So you have been talking about me before Asket. You, your daughter, Simyase, and Quetzal got in touch with me.
That is correct, because my father told me a lot about little Edouard with the already then different names and his task. Even if I did not know everything about you yet, but effectively only learned the whole thing in the course of our contacts.
I actually assumed that, but I was not sure. But tell me, dear friend, what do you think about the slander that the Figu and especially I had been given the center by patrons?
These false assumptions and assertions are based on malicious slander, which we are aware of and which, according to our investigations by you and the Figu Association, has been spread by envious people, religious and sectarian detractors, etc. for some time and is being refreshed again and again. But the effective fact is that only the past and present members of the association, to which you also belong, have built up the whole basic structure of the completely ramshackle farm with their own hands, work, and financial means, and made it into a little paradise. Fact and truth is also that you have made the greatest contribution and commitment in every imaginable relationship, in addition to your actual missionary work, which you have enriched with more than 60 valuable books and hundreds of articles, letters, and support for many Earth humans instead of the 8 books you had planned for. From this point of view alone, the slander is shameful and puts the truth in a false light, along with the fact that you and all those who have contributed to the building of the center, its funding and mission, are portrayed as malicious profiteers, especially you, who are.
Never mind, dear friend. There is no need for you to repeat yourself. For what has really been, what has been given and done, cannot be denied even by all the malicious slander, for there are still witnesses living who know everything and know the truth. And Bernadette wants to do something else for this by presenting the facts about this to the passive General Assembly, and also by writing an open article with a clarification for a bulletin. Note: the following article was inserted in the contact report at the express request of Ptaah 22.6, 2017.
Not donated.
Passive members as well as friends. Interested parties, relatives, strangers, antagonists, all enemies of Figo and Billy Meyer are very often of the opinion that he was given the Hinterschmidt farm as a gift. Some believe that the peer made sure that all opposition was put aside, while others presently claim that they knew that Billy financially gutted his cult members in order to buy the Hinterschmidt in its present state with large sums of money, or that the whole thing was given to him as a gift by stupid patrons. Absolutely none of this is true. The purchase of the Hinterschmidt was a joint project from the very beginning. When the first parties involved Jimmy Zombie Jacobus, the 2 Schutzbock brothers, Claire Frey, Olgi Walder, Amita Stetter, Herbert Frankel, Margaret Flammer, Lancer Moser, Dolph Barrett, Marcel Hart, the real estate agent Holmes Wady Glansman, Nissis Herzog, the owner at that time, Bernadette Brand, as well as a few others. I had finished inspecting the farm on the 31st of January, 1977. We sat down in Schmidt in the Freihof for a coffee. While we were sitting around the table, Dilly asked, "What do you think? Do we want to buy it?" Immediately everyone agreed, and so the joint purchase of the Hinterschmidt was decided. The farm, respectively, its surroundings were unkempt, neglected, dirty, and partly completely overgrown. The meadow between the main house and the remains was swampy and up to 2 meters deep, interspersed with all kinds of poisons, which had to be dug out and replaced by healthy soil where the square and the road and the path around the house were dirty and ankle-deep in mud. The house itself was not in a better, but in a very desolate condition. The rooms and the kitchen were dark and dirty and old as stone, and everything was run down and ramshackle, also the crested extensions of the house, which were on the verge of collapsing. On the upper floor was an old stone outhouse, and on the ground floor a toilet attached to the pigsty, with an ancient fragile toilet bowl that broke into several pieces the first time it was used. Anyone who wanted to live here had to do something fast, as that much was immediately clear. Nevertheless, the whole thing somehow made an inviting impression on everyone, and what's more, things were moving fast. Because Billy had received notice from the Hingwan municipality to leave his house, and he urgently needed a new home for himself and his family, from which he could not be evicted. However, we did not think about how we were going to raise the purchase price of the farm. $360,000 at the time we agreed to the purchase because none of the people involved or present had sufficient financial resources to purchase such a house. The fact that we could only pay for our drinks and the coffee of the estate agent by everyone present scraping together their last few bucks was symptomatic, as it should turn out in the following. In the end, the financing was only possible because all the members of the group at that time, including Bill, which must be said, put their last savings into the purchase. And those who did not have any simply took out a loan. The main thing was that finally a home of their own could be purchased for Billy and his family, and thus also a center for the mission. On the 28th of April, 1978, then Semoza acted as buyer or new owner on behalf of all group members. They serviced the broker, the SEMA, and the authorities. Because Figo was not legally valid at the time, that was not entered in the commercial register, and was not an authorized legal person with the right to sign and the corresponding statutes respectively. Although Billy had already founded the Figo Association in Hingwell on January 28, 1975, at the official founding meeting in accordance with Act 60 FF of the Swiss Civil Code SCC, that did not take place until June 17 or August 25, 1978, when the signatures of the founding members were notarized. Officially constituted pursuant to Act 60 FF ZGB. Figo was not officially constituted until September 21 and November 7, 1981, when the statutes were available and signed by the then President Engelbert Wachter and I at the notary's office in Tabenton. But it took quite some time before Figo El Semoza was able to bear the hinterland duty, because it was not until April 17, 1985 that the time had finally come. Within 10 years, the deposits of all financial participants were paid back, and all repayments were made through self-generated finances, group contributions, and savings of all group members, in which Billy was also involved, so that neither the group nor Billy was given anything in this respect. On the other hand, Billy refused to accept various large sums of money that were to be given to him or the Figo in order to be able to lead the center. Kawiza Ionas refused, saying that she could not be bought, so that all the members of the group, including him, to act out all the financial means themselves and put them into the construction of the center, because we all did not want to be dependent on outside help. As they said, the house and the yard were in an absolutely terrible condition. The cellar was underwater for 16 years, 1 meter deep, then had to be pumped out fast. This was the first work of Billy in January 1977, who, together with Jacobus, had been doing necessary work long before the purchase of the hinterland route, because he knew from a future view of the parent that the purchase and construction would work with the future Figo Center. And in the course of February, Billy and Jacobus brought the first of countless loads of building materials to the hinterland duty, which he was able to organize in London at the dissolved building company Hardware for little money. Then followed the first of a never-ending caravan of concrete and wall gravel transports, construction timber, stairs, the bricks, cement, a natural stone, sanitary and electrical equipment, and a huge amount of tools that would not stop during the first years. As soon as the first material arrived in hinterland duty, the lively building activity developed. The house first had to be repaired to the extent that it could be occupied at all. Billy and Jacobus worked in and around the house every day from about the beginning of January until they moved in on the 7th of April, 1977, from Monday to Sunday until late in the evening and sometimes well into the night. They worked like slaves so that at least the most necessary things could be prepared by the time they moved in. All the rooms were in an extremely desolate, terrible state. The floors were so blackened that there were only a few places where you could see that they were wooden floors. Even after they had been painstakingly sanded with an industrial machine, that they still left a lot to be desired. The dirt had literally eaten into the wood. The wooden walls on the lower floor were partly rotten, and in some places there was thick grey mold on the wood. Where the walls were neither rotten nor decayed, they had walked so much that there were often gaps between the panels that were several centimeters wide. In some cases, entering the rooms on the upper floor was a real test of courage, as one could never be quite sure when one would end up one floor below, including the floor. As it turned out later, the spaces between the walls and floors were stuffed with paintbrush wood and partly with old paper and insulated, a paradise for mice and a reason why it is too strictly forbidden to smoke or to leave candles burning unattended in the house and in the carriage house. Although Billy removed as much of the insulation material from the intermediate floors as possible. In the kitchen the tiles were partly loose, and it was almost a miracle that the wooden floor covered to the basement entrance was still stable and whole, which Danny concreted over and instead bricked up an exit door from the kitchen to concrete a floor slab and a basement staircase. I will prefer to remain discreetly silent about the sanitary conditions, but this Tesson chapter also belongs to a description of the construction of the Hinterschmidt. On the first floor there was, as mentioned, the so-called netching. That is to say an outhouse, and on the ground floor, at the back of the house, a correct toilet, which made Hinterschmidt history right from the first years. When Poppy, Billy's ex-wife, tried to sit on it against his warnings that the toilet bowl broke, much to the horror of the user. Of course, a new toilet was quickly procured, which Billy then installed at 23.30 hours at night and installed everything himself. The electrical installations in the house and in the shed were also catastrophic, as was the outdoor power supply, which was mounted on the wall outside a living room window on the first floor, with the danger of touching the wires if something wanted to be lifted out of the window. So it was ordered that the house wiring be removed and buried in the ground and a switch box installed on the east side of the house. While Billy removed various old electrical wires in the house, still insulated within rubber and tote wrappings. He removed these lines throughout the house, replaced a large part of them with cable pegs and new wires, and also carried out various electrical installations, which were then inspected by the EKZ and found to be in order. Then he also had to remove the overhead line to the shed, lay the swap plates, and pull in the electric cables. The remaining electrical work with new fuse systems and energy meters was then carried out by the electrical company Mela from Ramisma. It should also be mentioned that because Billy had removed the overhead line, which was also installed next to a window near the shed and was dangerous to life, the electrical supply line had to be laid from the main house to the shed. This meant that a trench about 35 meters long and 60 centimeters deep had to be dug from the electrical control box of the main house to the shed. So picks and shovels were taken by all the women and Billy present, and for a number of hours this hard work was also done, after which the sewer pipes were laid and the electrical cables pulled in, which the Mela Electrical Company then protected in the shed with a separate fuse box. During the first years we had only one washing facility, and namely a small cold water tap in the kitchen, under which a pouring stone, or a sink stone, or a small yellow stone washing trough was attached. For the time being, it was not possible to think of a bathroom, and so, in the course of time, the most beloved Figo members were those who lived close to the center and could provide a bathroom. If such members were not at hand, we had no choice but to disappear with a kettle full of hot water in the toilet or in our own room, if available. For the very hardcore among us, our opinion that the fountain that was of course available in summer and winter. Billy had built it in February 1977 with the help of Jacobus on the west side below the house. Since the water flowing into the well comes from a spring, it is also very cold in the one season. In winter, gas often had to be digged up before the cleanliness requirements could be met. Around the house, as already mentioned, it did not look any better than inside. On the contrary, the ground was softened up to the wall of the house with every rainfall, and it was a single swamp, so that everyone who took a few steps outside carried thick lumps of dirt into the house. So at least a narrow strip was quickly completed under the protecting roof along the house, so that at least the reasonably clean shoes one could change rooms without having to spread the dirt everywhere afterwards. On the 7th of April, 1977, Billy was able to move in with his family, accompanied by Jacobus, who also pitched his tents in Interschmidt on the same day. At first, however, this was only temporary, because at first he slept in an ancient metal bunk bed, on the top of which he had spread out and piled up his belongings. After he moved in, things really got going. The drudgery in the Hinterschmidt became a continuous work, and by continuous work is to be understood that daily between 18 and 22 hours, often even 24 hours, hardest work was done. As most of our members at that time were working away from home, most of the work was done in the evening and at night. Well, Billy and Jacobus, of course, were not idle during the day. Because Billy was an all-rounder, also did various plumbing, carpentry, and joinery work, but also laid out a garden and, together with Jacobus, cut down various trees with a 200 push-pull saw. Of course, I also had to remove the stalks from the ground, which Billy, as a trained miner, he did by undermining the whole thing with explosives and blasting it out. It was a matter of honor that all the members from outside got into their cars immediately after business respectively work closing time and drove to the center to continue working for hours. It was only at night that they finished work and drove home dead tired to get some more sleep. In retrospect, the fact that there was never an accident due to fatigue is almost miraculous. With the light of a big lamp, is they dug, concreted, built, and carpentered like crazy. Although their employees usually had no idea about the individual jobs and were not familiar with them either, according to their professions and day-to-day activities, everything still worked out well because Billy was the one who understood and mastered all the work, then could give the necessary instructions and guide the employees so that everything was done. Often the work was carried out almost non-stop from Friday evening to Sunday night because many things had to be prepared within a few months. And so it also happened that all our members had to learn to withstand constant high pressure. They learned to cope with and overcome overwork and overexertion, each within the framework of their own physical, psychological, or material abilities. And so it also came about that the drudgery on our farm bore other fruits than we had expected, because it was precisely at the drudgery that the spirits separated in the beginning, the strong stayed and the weak, unwilling, and incapable jumped off like fleas from a dead dog. First of all, in the month of April 1977, the former laundry room, which also served as a slaughterhouse, storage room, and shooting range for the hunters and gamekeepers, was converted into an office for Billy. I remember very well how he stood in the adjacent barn, kicking one foot against the wall and at the same time saying to the bricklayers' market, two brothers and work colleagues of my foster father, whom he had commissioned to do further work. This war must be broken out and rebuilt. As soon as he said his first words, there was a crash and the wall he had kicked against collapsed with a roar. After the floor had been filled and concreted, the walls were paneled, and during this work the first of many accidents also happened in the Hinterschmidt. Marcel Hatz, an accountant by profession, who was part of our group at the time, did the new office together with Billy and stumbled over a brick, fell down and broke 2 ribs. But his accident was not the only thing worth mentioning in connection with the conversion of the laundry room into Billy's office. The hunters and gamekeepers had become accustomed to shooting game from the laundry room and other rooms of our newly acquired farm in the previous years, and they were little amused by the new residents who ruthlessly spoiled their ambush. So it was also shortly after moving in that the first Nazi confrontations with the hunters took place. The shouting at each other only ended when Billy shouted, "I will put a bullet in the backside of the first hunter who lays in wait on our farm." The hunters who were so addressed were waylaid and disappeared, only to be accompanied by the police the next day. Under the walnut tree behind our house, the lament went on again loudly. The hunters tried to defend what they considered to be their customary right, and Billy, of course, did not let them talk to him at all. This noise was the beginning of a feud that lasted for years, during which the hunters gave us a hard time. Although they now obviously had respect for Billy because they no longer dared to simply do what they wanted, the peace was still far from being established. The peace offering from the hunters then came quite unexpectedly in the form of a reindeer liver, which was presented to Billy by Mr. Francie, the gamekeeper. In 1980, on a dutiful late summer evening, after Billy and Jacobus had processed 18 cubic meters of concrete between 8:00 hours in the morning and 16:30 hours in the afternoon, that the gamekeeper suddenly stood on the house square with his gift. Then from then on, with small exceptions, there was peace. Even before Billy's office was completely finished, we began to remove and level the swamp that lay between the house and the carriage house. Because the piece of land was completely spoiled by toxic waste that our predecessor had poured on it, Billy had decided to create a parking lot for our cars there. So we were busy picking and shoveling to excavate, replace, and level the ground. Gravel was damped and spread out from the new parking lot. Belts were inserted on the side of the slope to close the parking lot, and in some places the ground of the future parking lot even had to be concreted. The edges were planted at the end, and we joyfully waited for the things that would grow there now. Because in the first 2 years every plant perished. The soil was so poisoned that nothing could grow at first. Only after 2 years, too many efforts, and 2 trailers full of new humus, it had recovered enough for the first plants to grow. While some of them were still working on the car park, others were busy preparing the shed. Because Billy had set the date for the first meeting and the first lecture in Hinterschmidt on the 19th of June, 1977, when the last Aquarius, before the move was published in Hinwell. After the Schutzbock brothers, and they had teared away a huge pile of bark. The floor of the letter hole was torn out so that the supporting beams could be partially replaced, and Billy, with the help of some others, could install the stairs. So now we worked under high pressure in the shed on the hole so that it was finished on time. The last 5 days before the meeting were worked round the clock. While the men were knocking the paneling on the walls, Dranato Ventura tore out the dueling trap of a main connection in the east corner of the hole to be able to work more comfortably. This consideration soon proved to be unwise, cause the stability of the whole building had hung on this one plant. Once the paneling was completely in place, the walls had to be painted and the floor painted at the last minute. 3 hours before the start of the lecture, it was time to set up the chairs for the expected visitors. They're not too early because the first people arrived where the last chairs were still being put in place. When the visitors entered the hall in the afternoon of the 19th of June, 1977 and took their seats, Billy noticed that the carriage house began to shake alarmingly under the weight of about 75 persons. To prevent a panic that could have led to the worst, he waved Jacobus to him and left the hall with him. The two of them quickly fetched large beams and braced the building to give the shed and thus the hole the necessary stability for the time of the lecture. Only after the imminent danger had been averted did Billy appear again and the announced meeting could take its course. Billy, who had previously worked a full 5 days and nights without sleeping for even a minute, and now also held a lecture from 14 to 1700 hours HRS, which all those present followed with fascination. Afterwards, the questions and discussion started, which lasted until after midnight, after which the last visitors left the center at 0:30 HRS. After the meeting, the most ardent concrete work on the central post on the valley side of the Remise was carried out that same night. Again, of course, under the direction and participation of Billy, in order to finally give the whole and Remise the necessary stability for the future. During all this time, Billy had not slept a wink and had not allowed himself a minute's rest, which of course also happened more often later. Billy was the motor of the whole enterprise from the very beginning. Then he was able to motivate all members and bring them into line. As soon as the hole was finished and the shed was secured, the men began to dig the pit at its northern corner for our future meditation center. Here too, they worked through more than one night because at that time we did not have any machines for the excavation, and so all the work had to be done by hand by our men. They had to dig up almost 3 meters of rock hard loamy soil, a drudgery of special hardness. As soon as the hole had been dug and the wall on the mountainside had been concreted on, shortly after the work was finished, the entire brickwork collapsed on a rainy night. However, it was not only the heavy rain that was to blame for this collapse, but above all the Giza intelligences were the reason or trigger for it, because at that time they were still up to mischief and tried to harm us wherever they could. During a whole weekend, our men worked hard to dig out the hole for the lower room of the meditation center. Despite heavy rain, they completed the planned work and finally made the well-deserved end of the day early Sunday evening. Tired, as they were sitting around the kitchen table when suddenly someone sounded the alarm. Mountain pressure and rain had caused a dangerous landslide in the dugout hole, and now once again action had to be taken quickly because of the additional minute increased the danger considerably. So it was, everybody get behind the shovels and digs and the hole as is reachable. Renato Ventaro had just returned to his home in Farlanden from Minter's midroute, and Engelbert Walker entered his apartment in Hogan just as the telephone began to ring after spending the weekend with his family at relatives in Germany. Both immediately followed the emergency call from the center and appeared as quickly as they could at their nocturnal workplace. With united forces, the men called together with Herbert Schrankel and Guido Mosvruga, who spent their holidays at the center, and Hans and Konrad Schutzbock, had stayed on after their weekend assignment in the hope of a peaceful chat to begin to repair the existing damage and prevent even greater damage. They worked almost as hard as Billy and Jacobus, who are most used to such assignments. All of them got down to work once again and, in the night from Sunday to Monday, lifted up the slipped earth again and, following Billy's instructions, began to form and complete the uphill wall. Until the early hours of the morning they worked hard and had agreed to co-codavity. After a week the formwork was removed from the uphill wall. Because this wall had to extend the mountain pressure the most, it was also built particularly solid. It measured around 2 meters in height and was more than 5 meters long and 1.6 meters deep. So it was almost as thick as it was high. In the morning, after the formwork had been removed, Jacobus found, to his dismay, the wall at the bottom of the hole. It lay there as if it had been digged up and knocked over. He ran and got Billy out of bed to show him the mess. But what else could he do but to quickly start the preparations again in order to keep the damage and the delay as small as possible? The following night everything was ready again so that this time all 4 walls could be concreted. This was despite the fact that the entire formwork had to be rebuilt and was reinforced to the railway rails. Like a week before, all the men were again working together to get to their destination. This time, however, Guido's son Christian and Micho Evanchevich also helped. It was only on the 4th of September, 1977, at the 180th contact, that Kitzel explained that the collapse of the wall on the night from the 29th to the 30th of August had been the work of the Giza intelligences, who were doing everything they could to damage the common war and prevent Billy's mission. By whatever means the wall had been brought down by the Giza intelligences, it did not change the fact that it had to be removed, at least in part. So Billy and Jacobus took turns removing the concrete with the electric Congo hammer they had borrowed. They removed about 70 to 80 centimeters of concrete, but then immediately used it again for the ground level. After they had finished, they immediately concreted the floor of the lower room. When this was finally finished with a delay but at least without further mishaps, the ceiling was immediately shattered and, shortly, due to bad experiences reinforced with railway rails, which Hans Dent had organized at the Sousa Company winter tour, of where he was foreman, land then concreted. While the final work on the subspace of the center was still in progress, Engelbert was already working on the wooden construction for the pyramid. With the active help of his wife Maria and their children Connie and Rolf, the individual parts for the pyramid were built in the Wachter family's apartment in Haugen. In the Lat children's room, the scaffolding was erected, which was used to make intermediate assemblies to check the accuracy, because it was an important condition that the dimensions of the pyramid were exactly right. The individual parts prefabricated in Haugen were transported to the center and assembled on the floor above the threshing floor to form 2 complete side parts each. The final combination of the last 2 sections was then carried out on site. Now the whole pyramid had to be made vibration-proof according to Quetzal's instructions, which required huge copper plates, which Jacobus picked up in Mexican with tractor and trailer. To be able to transport the plates, that they were placed upright in the trailer and fixed. Arriving at the center, the plates were assembled and connected for the outer shell of the meditation pyramid. After the meditation pyramid was completely assembled, the walls of the pyramid upper room were bricked up, thus completing the actual meditation center. The final balance showed that about 50 cubic meters of concrete gravel had been used for the center construction, of which about 9 cubic meters were used for the uphill wall of the upper room alone. The interior construction of the meditation center now began in a hurry. Billy himself pulled in the electric cables and installed the electronic security systems for the pyramid. Before the interior decoration was started, Billy and Jacobus painted the walls of the center together, laughing and singing. After everything was in place, painted, furnished, and arranged, the individual meditations could begin exactly as planned. Sure, it had taken Billy's hard and sometimes also loud words, as usual, until the dim-witted people shifted gears and the defaulting workers shoveled and pickaxed faster. But now that everything was ready, it was the success of all, the success of a common and joint work. For almost 3 months the meditation center had been worked hard on, and by now it was already the end of October. It was high time to cut down the trees in the trend house garden, which was to be connected to the remise before the onset of winter. Billy and Jacobus had also noticed that below the shed, in the direction of Tobol, some large old pear trees had rooted completely and had become a danger to human beings and animals. So Jacobus and Billy sawed down the first trees on the center area, the wood of which was to be used for heating in winter. But this year the first snow fell unusually early and also stayed on the ground. The first winter in Hinterschmidt was one of the most snowy we have ever experienced. And so it also happened that most of the trees felled in late autumn remained lying around all winter and could only be processed the following spring, which caused us not minor heating problems. Here I want to finish my story, which only covers about 6 months from the beginning of the center. One thing, however, should have been clear, and that is that nothing was given to Billy and the members of the Figo, neither by the clearer nor by any patrons. Not only in terms of work and dedication were all the contributors required to the last, but also financially. Billy and Figo did not receive any financial donations, allowances, or patronage from any side at that time, but all participants paid everything out of their own pockets. If there were larger purchases to be made, their necessity was discussed at the group meetings, and then everyone gave as much as they could. The same way as it was done with the first coffee together in the Freihof. It remained the same afterwards, and it is still the same today, even if in the meantime the financial pressure has eased and Figo can afford things that in the past could only be dreamed of. Today, it is the case that the association is financially on a sound footing thanks to the joint efforts, and that thanks to Billy's clever financial management, there is also nothing to fear in the future. Not only in terms of work and planning did Billy always bear the main burden, but also in financial terms. The money that he had earned in his adventurous years in the Middle and Far East by returning kidnapped persons was frozen there for many years, and only when the Hinterschmidt duty had long since been purchased and was in an advanced stage of development was the money he had earned only gradually delivered to him personally. Which is to say that the money promised to him was actually paid to him by the persons who commissioned it, also to the last penny. This entire, not exactly small sum was also invested as a matter of course in the construction and expansion of the center, so that it can be rightly said that he not only made the greatest financial contribution of all, but also that he and his family actually lived on his meager disability pension of 800 Swiss francs in the first years of Hinterschmidt duty, which has doubled in the meantime, as well as on a few silent contributions from core group members or friends. The contributions of the core group members were regulated at an early stage and kept within a framework that allowed everyone to lead a normal life and was not overburdened financially, but that also the debts that had arisen from raising the funds for the purchase could be repaid to the creditors within 10 years without interest. So when unknowing decent fun antagonists and opponents or even so-called card commissioners keep claiming that Billy is a guru or card leader who gathered his members in order to build up and expand the Hintermeducci to their present state, then this is also a malicious statement, infamous late and a sneaky, slanderous land, as well as the stupid claim that the center and its construction had been mischievously supported and promoted by the parent, or that Billy and the Figo had been donated by unknown patrons, to which is why now all only minor personal contributions had to be made. Billy and the Figo was not given anything, neither in terms of work nor financially. We can say this with great satisfaction, because everything was built out and expanded under our own steam and with our own money, and brought to its present flourishing, to which the former core group members also contributed a great deal, who left the Figo for any private, domineering, or other unfathomable motives. And also thanks to a passive member who at a passive General Assembly penetrated with the proposal of an annual levy of 7% of a monthly salary, over and above the 30 franc amount of the officially required annual membership fee. All passive members have contributed a not insignificant part with their contributions and their work, and they continue to do so, for which Billy extends a very special heartfelt thanks to all passive members, patrons, and Figo friends. There's of course all core group members are very grateful for everything. The Simese Silverster Center is a joint effort of all those who have ever been involved, and this will also remain so in the future.
I can only agree with that because there is a real need for it. But now, dear friend Edward, I would like to come to the matter that happened last night at your General Assembly, the course of which we, Njana, Florina and I, observed, whereby the matter was extremely unfortunate. Because as you intervened in the correct manner with your clarification, what was said was tantamount to an unjustified accusation by the core group members involved in the incident. And this actually corresponds to what you said and thus defended those involved in the incident at the time. In a mild way, I would like to call this a careless tactlessness, which was a false consideration, and which was the result of guilelessness, imprudence, unreasonable trust and bias in relation to. In fact, I got to the bottom of it after you gave me the email from to read, which was undeniably offensive and accusatory, as you judged the letter yourself at the time and as I also felt it myself. And the accusation at the time that it was not him who was guilty, but rather the core group members who were involved in the events at the time, is firmly rooted in him, which is why he continues to carry it around with him. Under these circumstances, of course, there can be no return to Figo membership, at least not for the next 7 years. However, during this time, there would have to be an extensive change of attitude so that we would have to wait for these 7 years.